newcomers, because sometimes that's a surprise for them here. You know what it's like? Yeah. There's a lot of things that cost more in Nova Scotia than what they're used to.
Oh, they would come from Quebec. Who?
Cell phones. Cell phones. Yeah. Yeah.
You are recording now.
Oh, okay.
I just started it. Duck out there, but if you
Sure.
maybe send someone.
Okay, how do we stop the recording when we have to?
There is a button at the bottom of that screen that says.
Okay.
Or you can just close it.
We'll just close it. Okay, great. All right, we might as well start then. Good. Thank you guys for coming. So today we're going to talk a little bit about newcomers and how that relates from a mortgage and, for you guys, a real estate perspective. It's very timely. I don't know if anyone heard the news last night or this morning on CBC talking about all the new buyers that are coming into Halifax. Did anyone hear that? No. So the stat they gave, they said, you know, typically, and you guys can correct me if they're wrong, they said there's maybe about 5,000 real estate transactions in Halifax in a year. And 5 years ago, 50 of those would have been foreign buyers. And in the last few years, it's more like 200 are foreign buyers. So it's definitely increasing. So it's good to have an understanding of what that means if you get that call. And even though that's really, it's a small percentage, it's only 4%, but it's growing. And I don't know about you, but don't you hate it when you get that call from the person from the States or the UK and you're going, you know, I don't know anything about this. How am I going to talk to them about it, right? And you don't want to waste your time and take them out if you don't really feel that there's some potential there. So what today is all about is just kind of giving you a general guideline. You're not expected to know the ins and outs, but you want to know kind of the points to talk to them about to at least get them in front of someone to talk to them about what that would mean for a mortgage. So I broke it down into 3 categories. And keep in mind there's different terminology, but I'm kind of talking to you from a mortgage perspective. So we have mortgages for newcomers, and I'll explain what that means in a second. And we have mortgages for people that are here temporarily on a work permit. And then we have mortgages for non-residents. And Mark just had a question for me earlier, and we'll go through that because it's a good example. So basically, a newcomer, just like it sounds, is someone that wants to move to Nova Scotia. They are usually from another country. They probably have their PR card, like their PR status, and I know you guys have to collect ID, or they're applying for it. You may meet your clients when they're here visiting, and if they're here visiting, they should talk to a bank. Because there's often things that they will need to bring with them if they come back in 4 months and want to buy a home. And I can't tell you the number of clients that I will call and I'll ask for certain documents and, oh, that's packed and it's on a ship on its way. And then it's like a month or 2 before they get their stuff unpacked and can get the correct documents. And I'll give you an example of some of what that is. So that's what a newcomer is. Their intent is they're moving here to stay and they're applying or have their permanent resident status. But they're generally not a Canadian citizen, although sometimes Canadian citizens fall under this category. One example is, I'm a Canadian citizen, but if I've lived away for the last 10 years and lived in the UK and worked in the UK, I probably don't have a Canadian credit history anymore. So if I move back to the country, I'm reestablishing myself as, even though I'm a Canadian citizen, they fall under the newcomer program. You can come in, you're welcome to join us. So what we're going to talk about, newcomers come in 2 categories. Some of them are here because they're working, and then there's some that are coming and they're not working. And so there's some different criteria. Out of all 3 of these, the things you probably want to touch on is what kind of credit history do they need, what kind of income do they need, and what kind of down payment. In your case, the number 1 question I get from realtors is what do they need for a down payment? So we'll come back to that. The second category is temporary residence on a work permit. I do a lot in this category because companies such as Irving Shipbuilding will go to other countries where they have shipbuilding experience, recruit people, and help them move here. Irving will apply for the work permit, they smooth the way, they often pay their expenses for them to move here. So when someone is coming on a work permit, there's an expiry date on the permit. It's usually 2 years, some are longer, 3 or 4 years, and we need the work permit to be at least a year before the expiry date. The normal procedure is they come on the work permit and then they apply for their permanent resident status. So, because they think that they want to stay, so they apply for their PR status. And there's certain requirements that we'll go through. Then the third category are non-residents. So non-residents, just like it sounds, are clients who don't live here, but they're also clients who live in Canada, but do not claim their income tax in Canada. So that in the mortgage world falls under the non-resident program. So client might live in Bedford, he might own a house there, he might rent a house there, but he works away, maybe he works offshore, maybe he's paid in US dollars and he's not claiming any of that income in Canada, he's considered a non-resident. So it's for income tax purposes, it's kind of based on where they're filing their taxes. So any questions about the three categories? No, okay. So we'll go back to newcomers. So for newcomers, I met some today just before I came here. One of our financial advisors at the branch said, can you come down and meet these clients? They just moved here from the UK. So I went in and I was chatting with them. Now it was interesting because the way he got into the country is he applied for a study permit. So he was here on a study permit, but then he's going to apply for his PR status. But he's not working, he's studying. And his wife isn't working, but his wife's going to be looking for work. So when I meet with them in a week or two, I'm going to talk to them about working and how then we can use their income to get their debt servicing to work. So sometimes people come from other countries and they're looking for work. They're not working yet, but they have a lot of equity or assets because maybe they've sold a home. So they're coming with, you know, $200,000 or $300,000 or $100,000. They want to buy a home, but they have not yet found a job. So under this category, if they're not working, clearly we don't have any income that we can use to qualify them. Then what we qualify them on is their down payment, and they need to have 35% down. So that's what banks call an equity mortgage. Because we're basing the decision on the equity they have, they're putting 35% in, and they also need to show that they have enough equity or liquid assets to pay their mortgage, the principal and interest, and their property taxes for at least 12 months. So that's principal, interest, and taxes. But you know what? When you think of it, that's not a bad deal. They've come here, they're not working, so we're not using income to qualify them. We're saying, well, if you put 35% down, we can potentially lend you 65% of the value of the house, but you need to show that you have 12 months of the mortgage payment and property taxes. For newcomers that come here who are working, then debt servicing applies. So they come, they're working with Irving, they're making $80,000 a year. We plug in $80,000, we plug in their debts, and that's how we calculate how much they can be approved for. A couple of things to know. So credit, obviously, when they first move here, they don't have any Canadian credit history. So we always suggest that they get a bank reference letter from their bank, wherever that may be. Could be the US. I do a lot of UK, so I'll use UK as an example. A bank reference letter from their bank is a letter that says, you know, Darlene has managed her accounts in a satisfactory manner with no late payments. It's something very general, but it satisfies the bank. And it sounds easy, but the banking system in the UK and other parts of the world works very differently from here. You know, here we pick up the phone and we call Betty on the front desk and say, Betty, I need a letter. There, it's very hard to get, it's a lot of 1-800 numbers, so people don't know who you are when you're calling in. So remember I said when they're visiting, get them to talk to a mortgage person. So whenever I meet someone who's visiting, I always say, don't leave your country until you have the bank reference letter in your hand, and don't pack it in your shipment that's being shipped on a cargo freight, and it's not going to be here for a couple of months. Because banks overseas will not email or fax, they want to put it in the mail, and it can take I have one client like waiting and waiting and waiting to put in an offer. His letter was in the mail. They just have very different policies there. I had one client who was here waiting for his house there to sell, and he kept calling, getting the 1-800 number. He couldn't get anyone to commit that they would even send the letter. So that's why it's a good idea for them to get it before they move. Or even if you're often emailing your clients and just say, here, connect to Darlene or connect to someone who knows mortgages. And I always say, if you're coming in July, make sure you bring your past income verification, because sometimes that's helpful, and that you bring your bank reference letter. So really, the bank reference letter is in lieu of them not having a Canadian credit history. Let's chat a little bit about down payments. And there's all kinds of crazy ideas out there. I had a client email me a couple of weeks ago, and he said he went to another bank, I won't say who it was, and they told him he had to have a 50% down payment because he was a newcomer, but he's working, he's making $110,000 a year and was told he needed a 50% down payment. So that's not accurate. So I said, do you have any credit in Canada? No, because you just moved here. So the minimum down payment he would need would be 10%, which, hi, hello. Come on in, which isn't a big deal, right? 10% versus 50 is quite a difference. So he was happy to hear that. So you can be a newcomer, get a mortgage with as little as 10% down payment with no Canadian credit history, but with less than 20%, your mortgage is insured through CMHC or Genworth Financial. They want to see the bank reference letter. So that's why the bank reference letter is so important. Newcomers can also get a mortgage with as little as 5% down, just like regular clients, if they have a 12-month credit history in Canada. And for some, they want to get to know the areas, so a year goes quickly. So the first thing that we always get them to do is open a credit card, because that's the best way to create a credit history, and we tell them how to manage it. So there is a possibility that they could get a mortgage with as little as 5% down if they've been here a year and have good credit, of course. Nothing worse than when you're creating fresh credit not to have good credit, because if they miss like one payment on a visa, it's not a big deal for you or I if we have a couple of credit facilities, but it is for someone when they only have one credit card, and that's what the credit agencies are basing the credit score on. Good question. Yes. Yeah. Like typically banks would like to see on an average client, not these scenarios, 2 years of 2 separate credit trades. So that's the ideal world. But if, yeah, or even like cell phones report to credit agencies. But for a newcomer with a full year of a credit card, then CMHC would consider them with 5% down. Credit's a complete picture, so it's going to be everything. Like they would consider them with 5% down, if they're working for a reputable company, the debt servicing is low, like there's all of those things that would go into the complete picture. So that's if they're working. If they're not working, it's minimum 35% down for the equity mortgage, just to kind of recap just before you guys came in. They could be a newcomer not working, but they've sold a house, they have lots of assets, so they're putting 35% down, and they have to show that they can make the mortgage payment for at least a year. No, well, to fall under newcomer, they have to be here less than 5 years. No. Where we get into minimums is kind of with their work history. So again, in this scenario, if they're working, and this is the policy, and I'll tell you what the policy is, and then we can always ask for exceptions to the policy. But the policy under newcomers and temporary residents on a work permit is that they should be working at least 3 months in Canada. Just like anyone else, yeah. Now, like I say, there's policies and then there's exceptions. And right now I'm working on one, and this client was recruited by Irving. Irving paid their expenses to move them here. He's been working 1 month, and they're always anxious because sometimes the employer will put them up, but they'll only put them up for 3 months. So they want to have a host to move into after 3 months, which means they want to put in an offer after a month or 2 months. So I always know that they're going to put in an offer before the 3 months is up. So then I always give them I just say fair warning. The policy is CMHC will want to see that you've been working at least 3 months. So we will be asking for an exception to that policy. And we actually have a special kind of guideline for clients who are here working for Irving Shipbuilding because they're such a big employer and they have that government contract where they're employing a lot of people. So far, I've been lucky at getting the exception.
Is it that, okay, they put it in an offer, closes?
No, because you need the approval up front, right? You don't need the approval at closing date. You need it within the 5 to 10 day window.
On an exception, say, okay, see.
It's either they make the exception or they don't. It doesn't really have anything to do with the closing date. But I get that from a lot of clients who say, yeah, but I'm not closing until such and such a date. Well, as long as you don't need your financing until 2 days before you close, it might work. But otherwise, it's just an exception to the fact that they haven't been working for 3 months. Yeah. So temporary residence on a work permit, we chatted just before you came in, the expiry date needs to be at least a year out from when they're applying. Companies usually help their employees get the work permits. That's how they get here. Most are 2 years, some are 3 years, and then they apply for their PR status when they're here. So some of the criteria under here, credit works the same way. If they have no credit, and they want to buy a home and get a mortgage, then they need to have 10% down. That's the minimum. But if they've been here for a year on a work permit and have a good 12-month credit history of one credit trade, then high ratio mortgage insurers will consider it with as little as 5% down. So the same applies as up there. Obviously, everyone that falls in this category, they are working because they're here on a work permit. So by the nature of why they're here for a job. So then debt servicing does apply, right? So whatever their income is, just like it would with you or I, is how we figure out. Yeah.
What if you have a couple and one of them is like
right.
Does it ever go?
Yeah, because I've been running into that a lot.
So if she's been here and she's working and he just came and he isn't working, so I would look deeper. If he doesn't have any debt at all, there's no harm to add him to the application, right? But if he has no income and has debt, it might reduce the amount they could be approved for because we're only basing it on her income. So you always kind of want to see, but so in that case, it would be based on her income. Do you know, are they here with their PR status or work permit? Not sure?
Not sure.
Yeah, I know. Because again, do you get that like, oh, I don't want to ask too many questions? Like, yeah. So now just say 2 simple things. Oh, so do you have your PR status or are you here on a work permit? Because it's one of the two. So it just kind of simplifies it. Yeah. Because if they're not working, then they have to have enough equity. That's the 35% down payment with the principal, interest, and taxes.
So even if she is.
Nope. It would only go to the 35 if they couldn't qualify under her income. Something that happens a lot that's important to know is sometimes clients will have a house in another country and it hasn't sold, but they're renting it. So you need to be kind of careful with that because the rules say that we have to add debts that are outside the country, but we cannot add rental income to qualify them for outside the country. So if they're selling their home, that's the easiest, most straightforward. Although I'm going to tell you a little bit about selling homes outside of the country and to watch your dates on that. Just remind me and we'll come back to that. So back to the temporary residence on a work permit. 10% down is the norm when they first get here, but 5% down is a possibility if they have credit. And then we just do their income and do their calculation like we would anyone else. So we get a copy of the work permit. Again, the bank reference letter is important. So it's good for them to have that. So non-residents. So non-residents are clients that are either non-residents, they don't live here, they live in another country, or Canadian residents who are not claiming their income in Canada. For mortgage purposes, they're considered a non-resident. And the term, they really need to think of a different term because people will say, no, I live here, and we know you're a Canadian and you live here, you're a resident of Nova Scotia. Exactly. It's based on where they're filing their income tax. So the minimum down payment for non-residents is 35%. And we can only do mortgages for countries that are on the eligible list. Many. Because what it has to do with are the... No, it's the income tax laws between countries. Oh, okay. And there's some countries where, I did one a couple of years ago and I can't remember the country, but we got it approved, but they have to hold back a certain amount of withholding tax because the country they live in maybe will tax them on that. So it's really to do with the tax laws between countries. So sometimes these kind of deals go to our legal department to sift through and say, no, they're not on the, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward list that I can look up and say, no, you're not on the eligible country list. And then the only time we can really get an exception to that is if they're like a Canadian expat who's living in another country but had ties in Canada at one point, then we can ask for exceptions to that. So it's always 35% down. If we are, the income that we're using to qualify them, we need to get a written letter saying you work for Schlumberger and here is your income. And sometimes we will, so if they're coming from the US, and you had an example there, we always pull a US credit report, which we do through our systems. It takes 2 or 3 days to get that. They can get their own, but we have to pull it and see it. In all of these scenarios, like what was one, I had a client a couple of months ago, had 10% down payment, but could not get the bank reference letter. So there's an international credit report through Experian that they can pull, print out, it's very long, and I sent that in place of the bank reference letter to see if they would accept that, and they did, because it basically just showed that they made good payments. So for non-residents, credit is still important from wherever they are living, and their down payment, there's no exceptions to the 35%. There's non-residents, and then there's a special category for U.S. non-residents, because U.S. non-residents are a little bit closer to home, so some of the credit and financing is a little more similar to what we do here in Canada. So one of the things Marc-Andre just asked me was about, he has a client from the U.S. and they want to buy an investment property. So for all of these other categories, you have to be owner occupied in the home. So the only one that could be an investment property would be a non-resident but a U.S. non-resident. If it's any other non-resident, then the property has to be owner occupied. The other thing is no construction draw mortgages. So when I say like construction draw, if it's a turnkey purchase, it's a new build, but closing date is August 1st, their purchase price is $250, they're paying it all on closing, that's turnkey, that's fine. But if it's we want to buy land and build and do draws, that's a construction draw mortgage. Like I had clients a couple years ago who started building a home because they were Canadian but not filing taxes here. They were building like this $400,000 home on the water. It was beautiful. Didn't live in the US. I can't remember where he was claiming his taxes. We could not do a construction draw mortgage for him. So in that case, what he had to do is he built it out of all of the savings and investments that he had. And then as soon as it was complete, we turned around and did a refinance on it. So then he refinanced it up to 65% and put his money back into his investments. Something to kind of watch for when clients tell you they have a house that they have to sell, wherever they're from, and I'll use the UK again because I do a lot of that clientele. The rules work very differently there and other countries than it does here. So here you put in an offer, you have your condition dates on financing, home inspection, etc. And then it's considered a firm offer, right? Have any of you had a deal fall apart after everything's been firm before the closing?
Usually it's no finance. Buyers actually have the money.
Right, yeah. But if all the, with all due diligence, if they put in financing and all in that, they usually don't fall apart. I mean, I know it does happen, but usually they don't fall apart. In the UK, until the closing day, anything can happen. So it's the craziest system over there. They get an offer, so they'll say, oh no, I sold my home. Okay, let's talk about what that means. We have a buyer who wrote a contract who said they're going to buy the home. But then the lawyers start doing all this work in the background, and sometimes it's the chain reaction of the buyer put in an offer. We call it an SOPP. They don't call it that there. And right up until probably 5 days before closing, when the lawyers do what's called an exchange of contracts, anything could happen and it could fall apart. So if they're relying on that for their down payment, you have to be really careful that they're actually going to have the funds in their bank account. Yeah. So last year I had clients from the UK and they had sold on paper their home and they put in an offer before they talked to anyone. So then I met them and I was like, okay, so tell me about your closing over there, because they were putting a really big down payment. It was like a $200,000 down payment and let's say a $5,000 deposit. Well, the buyer loves the house. They're really sure that it's not going to fall apart. And my next question was, what would happen if that money doesn't go in your bank account and you've passed the financing date on your offer here? You could lose your deposit. Oh yeah, I didn't think of that. There's just so many things that could happen. So what he did is he tried to speed up the other end, the closing date. So it just kind of came in under the wire where they got the funds from the lawyer in the lawyer's office, and then they knew that it was closing.
So they don't have any.
It's not like the condition, the firm and not firm condition dates.
Oh.
Yeah, it's very stressful, and definitely works differently. Maybe some legal fees for having a lawyer work on it, but it's just like, sorry. I had that happen 4 or 5 years ago, and my client had a couple of investment properties in the UK. Oh, no, I'm sure, no, this guy wants these investment properties. They're going to sell. He put in an offer, and his deals fell through. He was like, he thought they were sold. The lawyer calls out, sorry, they're backing out, and this is close to closing day. He lost his deposit. Yeah.
Well,
yes, we love them because
auctions in Australia.
auctions in Australia. Why? What happens there? They put homes.
That's how they sell homes.
Oh, didn't know that. Yeah.
It's open auction. People line up in front of the home and they all bid on it.
My gosh.
Yeah.
And then is it like, do they put in conditions like we do, where they say, yeah.
And usually it's.
Do they have to have the money there and then?
Apparently so, but maybe not. There's the risk like that is in the UK as well. They don't close even if they win the bid.
Right.
They're different than a regular auction. You can raise your hand and I want to buy it for this. Doesn't mean you actually have to. You can be some royal shit disturber trying to.
Yeah, to get the price up.
Yeah.
Or something. Yeah.
But yeah.
So that's kind of the Coles Notes version of newcomers when they come to Canada. So some of the things you want to ask them: do they have a house that they have to sell? They should talk to someone if they're here visiting before they go back, so that they're bringing the right stuff with them when they come.
Said to
That was the scenario that we were just how it works differently, that they don't really have firm deadlines with their financing and home inspection. So anything can happen. It can fall apart. So if you had a client who says, no, my house sold in the UK, so I'm going to maybe I don't need a mortgage because I'm going to have $400,000 from the sale. Right, we can't use the rental income. Yeah, no, that's okay. You were thinking, I think of the other one. Because sometimes they'll say, no, I don't need a mortgage. My house is selling, and then I'll have enough equity. So I would just question them a little bit on when will you have the equity at the lawyer's office or in your bank account, just so you don't get in a situation where, 2 days before closing, they're not going to have their equity. So no construction, no investment. They have to be owner occupied. That's kind of the, unless it's the U.S. Yeah, that's right. There's some handouts here that I always give to UK clients or other clients just about buying your first home in Canada and some things to be aware of. So I'll give you one of those. Welcome. Do you guys have any scenarios or questions? And then I'll tell you a little bit about the new government. You're welcome. Do you guys come across a lot of newcomers?
We do, yeah.
Yeah. They're lovely to deal with because they're so excited about being here, and they get so much more usually for their dollar.
In a lot of cases, I find they have more money than they know what to do with.
Sometimes that happens. Now, I guess because I deal with more temporary residents on a work permit, one thing I find, even though I always say you have to be working for 3 months, and then I say at the very least get me a pay stub. Like, don't put an offer in until you have one full pay stub. But the other reason for that is, we were talking about it earlier, the cost of living here, because there are some big surprises until they've kind of received their pay stub and see all the deductions that are taken off.
Well, the other thing too is, I find this, you find it within Canada so much as it is around the rest of the world as well. They think that things here are just naturally cheap. It's like the difference between a house in Digby and downtown Halifax, right? They think, oh, okay, Nova Scotia is Canada, I can buy it for next to nothing. I want a next to brand new house, 4 bedrooms in Clayton Park for $100,000. No.
Right, it's not going to happen.
I can find you a garage with a loft.
Yeah.
Not like,
and on a map,
I can find you a shack or a shed in the South End for that.
And on a map, maybe they are looking at the house in Yarmouth, but they're working in Halifax and thinking that that's going to work for them, right? They don't have a sense of the geography of how that would really work.
And I just had he's from the UK, wants business, 56,000.
Right, for 50 grand, that's not going to happen. Yeah.
I mean, the 50 pounds is probably like $100,000.
Yeah, it's like 1.76 or something,
no,
but still, yeah,
So
yeah.
I think the getting a not as cheap.
As they think, yeah. And you know what? Nothing worse than if they come here, buy a house from you, and then they're unhappy because it's too expensive. And I have had that happen too. And it's not a great feeling when they come back to the bank and say, what can I do? Like, I'm having issues now making my mortgage payment. So I always sit down with them and say, let me just show you the other expenses. So here's the purchase price of your house. You take off the down payment. Here's what your mortgage payment would be. Here's what property taxes would be. They call it council tax in the UK. So one thing that they're often surprised with is water and sewer bills if they're on municipal services, because there it's all kind of lumped into their property taxes. So that can be what, $70 or $80 a month, right? Home insurance, that's usually about the same. Heat and power, we talk about that, but groceries are more expensive here than they think. They get more deductions off their pay than they think. So
Sales
it's
tax is higher.
good for them to see a tax on everything. Cell phone, internet, and cable. I mean, you can't get anything in your home service for less than $180 a month, really. And that's pretty basic cable.
Even if you just take internet.
Exactly. Yeah. And over there, or other countries, there's so much competition. Canada's really behind when it comes to that. So our costs are really high.
Even just the airtime.
Exactly.
Like yourself,
I'll give it your hydro power bill 5 times the government. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. But we digress. But the point is, it's good for them to know what things cost here. Yeah, yeah, for sure. 2:30? Okay, so just quickly, do you guys remember last year that the provincial government announced that they were doing down payment assistance programs? Did you hear that announcement last week?
We actually, we had a client last year who got it.
Yes.
So they were
one of the 123 in Nova Scotia that got the loan.
They were actually foreigners.
They were a newcomer. They had been here a little over a year.
Yeah. So that's back, but it goes fast. So if you have any clients that they said it's a little bit more this year, but it's really not much more. I think last year it was like 1.3.
And we had someone else apply right after and they
not get it.
so
And clients had very different experiences with it. So just to kind of recap what it is, it's a loan. So it's called Nova Scotia Down Payment Assistance Program to give financial support for first, so you have to be a first-time home buyer with modest income, and I'll tell you what that is. And then they get an interest-free loan. So it does have to be paid back. Some people think they're getting this for free. Yeah. So there's different rules for HRM and the rest of Nova Scotia. So we'll talk HRM. For HRM, the household income has to be under $75,000. So if 2 people are working and they're both making $40,000, they don't qualify, and they have to provide proof of what their income is. The purchase price in HRM cannot exceed $280,000. So if they're buying a $300,000 home, there's no point applying. In the rest of Nova Scotia, it's $150,000. They have to have good credit. They have to be pre-approved by a lender. The property has to be in Nova Scotia, of course. We've said they have to be first-time home buyers. The credit score last year they were looking at, so I'm assuming it'll be around the same as around 650. That's what they want to see for a credit score. And they have to go online and kind of review the material. It must be their principal residence. Okay, so rentals, seasonal properties are not eligible. And then the maximum they would get, so the maximum loan amount, so if they have to be making less than 60, so it's based on the amount they're making, and don't worry too much about the numbers, but if they're making less than 65,000 household income, the maximum loan they would get, and the maximum loan available is 14,000. So if they're making the 75,000, they get 8,400. So their monthly payments wouldn't be a lot, paying it back. Like probably the maximum monthly payment would be about $120 a month to pay that loan back.
it'd be cheaper than the portion of so.
Yes. Well, and really what it comes down to is if they have no other options, like this is it can be a great option. Now, I had a few clients last year apply for it, and they all had very different experiences, and it was based on the representative they were dealing with from the housing program. And my one client who ended up getting it, like he kept saying, well, check back next week, check back next week. He could not get an answer. He happened to have the 5% down payment, but he was pulling from everywhere to get it. So it was creating a bit of hardship, but he could have managed it. So we finally said, okay, if you don't get it, are you still buying the house? And he said, yes, I'm buying the house. So then it bought him a couple more weeks, and then he did eventually get the loan.
That's what happened to ours too.
But his representative, like it took him 4 weeks to hear back. And then another client was like, oh yeah, no, I called, I got approved, and boom, they had their loan.
It was quick.
Yeah. So everyone, there could be different. But I think after probably 2 or 3 months, it was gone last year. Is that what? Yeah. It didn't really last long. Yeah. So if you know anyone that that would be a good program for, there's a 1-800 number and a website. They can go on and check it out. And they should meet with the bank first to get pre-approved because they need to show that they're pre-approved to.
That was our thing. I wanted a rep, whatever. It's like, we'll buy a house.
Right. Yeah.
So we did.
Yeah.
Because it's scary because you're like, oh, you put an offer in and realistically you don't know if you're getting it or not.
Right.
So it's
a
little bit
they need to either then say, if they don't have it by the time the financing clause is up, then it's either okay.
Well, I think the big thing is he's like, can I get pre-approved? Like, am I approved if I don't have this? He was able to do it. had to,
Okay,
however they work. So,
they made it work.
right.
Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it. There's some other great offers that we have on right now. I'll just quickly touch on them, and then I don't want to take much more of your time. No, that's okay.
I know when it's stuff, it's this stuff.
Kids are important.
You like to think that way.
Yes,
Depends on the day.
Depends on the kid.
they think that. And we saw your little boy, Andrew, so we know he's a cutie at the hockey game. See ya. There's a first-time home buyer cash offer on right now for RBC and other clients. So if their mortgage is between $100,000 and $299,000, so under $300,000, they could get $500 in their RBC account. There are a few criteria, which I'll tell you about. If the mortgage is over $300,000, then they'll get $1,000 in their RBC account. And then if it's over $500,000, but there's not many first-time home buyers over $500,000 in Nova Scotia, maybe in Toronto, then they would get $1,500. So the criteria, it's pretty simple. They need to have their mortgage payment come from an RBC account, and they need to pick a term that's 4 or 5 years or longer. So nothing too complicated, but that's a good offer, huh? And the other one, which you may not deal with as much, but it's good to know if you work with someone at RBC and you're looking to send them a referral, is switching your mortgage to RBC. So if someone has a mortgage coming up for renewal, which at this time of year there are a lot of renewals because they bought 5 years ago and closed in the summer, then it's sometimes a good opportunity for them to talk to other banks about what they can offer. So right now, if a client switches their mortgage to the Royal Bank, if they have a Avion credit card, they'll get 30,000 travel reward points. If they don't have an Avion card, they will get a $700 WestJet gift card. So that's a little bonus offer that we have on. Their payment does not have to come from an RBC account, but it does have to be a mortgage term of 4 or 5 years or longer. So I'm going to de-mic and then we can talk if you have any questions. What did she say to do here? Yeah.